All right, this video is for the second half of Module 18, talking about long-run aggregate supply. So in the last video, I talked about short-run aggregate supply, but now we have to look at long-run. And long-run aggregate supply is in a vertical line, so it's actually going to look like this. So it's actually kind of boring, but the aggregate price level in the long run really doesn't make a difference, and no matter what the price level is, we're going to offer the same amount of real GDP. That's basically what this is saying. But the question is, why? Why is it the long run aggregate supply curve is a vertical line? Well, if you remember from the last video, I talked about the short run aggregate supply curve and it being upward sloping. Why was it upward sloping? Well, we talked about in the short-run aggregate supply curve that wages and some input costs are sticky in the short run. And so now in the long run, okay, all prices are flexible. So any change in the price level doesn't affect the long-run aggregate supply curve. Because basically what you have happening is that over time, the nominal wages will reflect what's going on with the price level. So when we talked about short-run aggregate supply, we said that you were, stuck in a contract. So right now I am stuck in a contract. I cannot negotiate what my salary is going to be in the short run. Now, in the long run, what happens is that eventually my contract will come due and I can actually renegotiate the terms of my contract and how much I am actually going to be paid. So what happens in the long run is that, for example, if the price level is increasing, okay, workers are then going to look at that and say, hey, I deserve more money. And so they're going to demand more money, which is then going to cut down on profits. And so in the end, it doesn't really matter what the aggregate price level is. It's going to adjust automatically back to the long run aggregate supply curve. So money is very flexible. The output at the long run aggregate supply curve is also called what we call the potential output. This is actually showing us where the economy should be. This is kind of our full employment, okay? So this is going to be where we have natural rate of unemployment, because remember our quote-unquote full employment is going to be the natural rate, because we will always have structural and frictional unemployment. So when the potential output is the long-run aggregate supply curve, this is because prices in the long run are ultimately flexible and can reflect any changes in the aggregate price level. So as a result, we're just going to offer that potential output. Remember, when we draw this, Y is standing for GDP and P is for potential GDP. So this is where we want to be. Now, do you suppose the long-run aggregate supply curve could change? Why, yes, it could. So just like any other curve we've talked about, it can change. So what causes the long-run aggregate supply curve to shift? Well, a couple of things. Number one, if you remember when we talked about the production possibilities curve way back at the beginning of the semester, and we talked about what would cause that to change. All of those things are economic growth, which basically relates back to our long-run aggregate supply curve. So in the long run, we could have a change in the quantity of resources, how many resources we have out there. So we could have not just one lovely tractor here, but we could also have two lovely tractors. Okay, that would definitely increase the total potential output that we could actually make. Second thing that would cause long-run aggregate supply curve to change would be the quality of those resources. Later on, we'll talk about economic growth more specifically, but generally, there are many countries out there that have varying degrees of education, and when a country decides and the government decides that they're going to spend more money on education, what happens is that the long-run aggregate supply curve is going to shift to the left, or shift to the right, because ultimately what will happen is that since our workers are more educated and know what they're doing, we have a higher potential of what we can actually produce. So education can change those things. We can also talk about technology. Technology over time can also increase the amount of productivity that we can have and the amount of products that we can produce. So I don't know if you've seen these kinds of pictures before were evolution from apes, right? And we have been devolving with tools to the point that now I'm hunched over a computer. But the idea is that obviously technology generally is going to increase our long-run aggregate supply curve and shift it to the right. Okay, so now that we know about short-run aggregate supply and long-run aggregate supply, now we have to put the two together. So, putting the two together, first of all, short-run aggregate supply curve will always shift to a point where it will intersect with the long-run aggregate supply curve. So you will always have this shifting that will happen. Because here's what it looks like is that, okay, here's our long-run aggregate supply curve, and here's our current output right here. Okay, so we're maybe producing here. Okay, this is our short-run aggregate supply curve. So Y1 here is how much we're actually producing. But this is our potential. Okay, here's what happens is that when we're producing here, okay, we have a lot less unemployment. Because remember, I told you that this is our fullest potential. This is going to be where we have our natural rate of unemployment. If we have any output more than that, that means that we have unemployment that's less than the natural rate. How's that possible? Well, we could have, you know, for a time being, very short, small amount of frictional or structural unemployment. But here's what happens in the long run. In the long run, what happens is that we have people looking for jobs. We have a lot of people that are employed, so we don't have a whole lot of people looking for jobs. And we have employers out there that are trying to hire. They're trying to get the best job and trying to entice people. Oh, you should come work for me, not that other guy. Well, why should I work for you? Well, I'll offer you more money. Well, over time, what will happen is that that short-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the left, because what will happen is that we will have the nominal wages will eventually rise, because there'll be a bidding war over the workers that are out there. So over time, our short-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the left, because those nominal wages will rise. And remember, nominal wages is one of those factors that causes a change in short-run aggregate supply curve. So eventually, we'll hit this point, and so we'll shift from here to here. And now, oh, now we're at potential output. Or we could have this scenario where maybe we're producing here. So now we have a short-run aggregate supply curve here, and we're producing here, and here's our Y1. And remember, YP is when we are at our fullest potential. This is where we have our natural rate of unemployment. Well, now we're less than that. So that means we have cyclical unemployment. So we have people out there that want a job that can't find one. So there's not enough jobs out there. So in other words, what happens is that there will be people that will just take jobs, the very few that are out there, and so the producer is going to be more in charge of the wages. And so what will happen is that eventually wages will have to drop. Because what will happen is that the producers are going to be the ones that are going to be determining and say, oh, you can work for me, but I'm going to pay you this much. I'm sorry, I can't afford any more. So as a result, the nominal wages will eventually drop over time, and it will shift the aggregate supply curve back to intersecting with our long-run aggregate supply. And so what will happen is that we will eventually get back to that potential output, but our wages will drop. Okay, so if the short-run aggregate supply curve producing output, that's this, is lower than the potential output, it will cause the nominal wages to eventually drop over time and shift the short-run aggregate supply curve to the right, where it will eventually meet that long-run aggregate supply curve. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm done for now.